I'd like to commend the Rural Group for bringing this motion to the House this morning and for giving us an opportunity to debate what are very important issues, particularly in respect of the cost of living crisis that we've been discussing in some detail, that we know affects probably all workers and every family across the state. But it is important to recognise that there is an extra burden on many rural and particularly farming families. Of course, whether you live in an urban or rural area, you're facing with the challenges of high rents, high childcare costs, high insurance costs, high mortgage rates, all the areas that we've been discussing. But there's been a particular issue with regard to increases in the cost of energy and motor fuel in particular that have an additional burden on farming families, and that's quite clearly evident in the price of fertiliser, which has already been discussed. But fundamentally there's a problem, and the problem is exposed in the remarks of the Minister for Agriculture, who I regret isn't here, because he still maintains that the CAP budget and funding for farm support has increased, when it quite clearly has decreased as a result of the poor negotiation that his government engaged in with respect of the European Union budget. There will be less support for farm families over the round of the next Common Agriculture Policy than there was in the previous one. That is an absolute statement of fact, yet the Minister continues to sell a spin that that is not the case. And then it's a three-card trick, because they also claim, as they did in last night's debate, that €1.5 billion of carbon tax funds are ring-fenced to go to farmers in agri-environmental schemes, when that €1.5 billion, if it materialises, is actually just plugging some of the hole that is evident in the Common Agricultural Policy as a result of the same bad negotiations at EU budget level. So nobody can argue with what are statements of facts, that over the next 5 years, farming families will be paying more in carbon tax, getting less in farm support, while being asked to do more in relation to their environmental obligations. So they were, as all of us were, eagerly waiting to see what big measures would be introduced in the government's cost of living package. Can you imagine, if you're a farming family sitting at the top end of North Monaghan, waiting in anticipation to see what supports the government are going to introduce in their cost of living package, to find out that Lewis tickets are going to be 20% cheaper? That is welcome, absolutely, for those who have access to public transport, but the fact that it was actually incorporated into a cost of living crisis that's most acutely felt by rural communities just shows how out of touch this government are in respect of the services that are in place. I welcome the measures announced last night of a €7 million package for pig farmers, although I agree with previous speakers that it will go nowhere far enough. 2 weeks ago, I raised this in a topical issues debate with the Minister for Agriculture. We had what I thought was a very constructive debate. We outlined the need for a financial package. We also outlined the need for CBI and banks to step up to the plate in terms of supporting our pig farmers but other vulnerable farmers, and the Minister indicated that he had met them and was expecting some improvement. Well, no improvement has come. I also outlined the difficulties in terms of staff shortages at processing plants that still haven't been resolved, even though the government have stated that they have put in place the measures to address those staff shortages through permits. It still hasn't been resolved. So we actually need to go beyond the rhetorical support and actually into the actual delivery of support. If we want to support those workers, families and communities that are struggling to make ends meet, the answers are very simple. The answers have actually been outlined quite clearly by Sinn Féin. We need a cost of living cash payment for those who need it most. We need to see a support for renters. They need 1 month's rent back in their pocket, and they need to see a rent freeze for at least 3 years. We need to increase the minimum wage. We need to increase all working age social welfare payments. We need to extend the fuel allowance by at least 2 weeks. And we need to ensure that we cut childcare services by a third. And we need to scrap the proposed increase in carbon tax. And finally, I'll say this very briefly. the disgraceful actions of Russia in the Ukraine will likely lead to EU sanctions of some sort. If those sanctions impact negatively on Irish workers, families and farmers, well, then the EU needs to bring forward a package, and I would ask Minister O'Donoghue to make that point at EU Council level.